The blood on Rose Colter's worn cotton dress had long since dried to a rust-colored stain, but the whispers in Yuba City, California, followed her like shadows even 3 years after her husband's brutal death. She walked through the dusty Main Street in the spring of 1883, her shoulders hunched against the weight of pitying stares and hushed gossip that painted her as the unluckiest woman in Sutter County. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson murmured from the general store porch, loud enough for Rose to hear. "Still wearing that same faded dress. Can't even afford proper morning clothes anymore." Rose's fingers tightened on her wicker basket as she continued toward the butcher's shop, her brown eyes fixed straight ahead. At 23, she felt ancient, worn down by poverty and grief, and the relentless scrutiny of a town that had decided her story was finished. Her husband Samuel had been trampled by a spooked horse during a cattle drive, leaving her with nothing but debt and a small house that leaked when it rained. The other ranchers had taken Samuel's horses to cover what he owed them, and Rose had been scraping by ever since, taking in washing and mending for pennies. "I heard she was begging for work at the saloon," another voice whispered, and Rose felt her cheeks burn with humiliation even though it was not quite true. She had asked about washing glasses and linens, nothing more, but in this town, truth mattered less than the story people wanted to tell. She had just reached the butcher's shop when a commotion erupted from the far end of town. Horses thundered down the street, and Rose pressed herself against the wooden storefront as 3 riders came into view, their animals kicking up clouds of yellow dust. The lead rider sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders outlined against the bright California sky, and even from a distance, Rose could see the easy confidence in how he controlled his powerful bay gelding. "That is Blake Garrison," the butcher's wife said, appearing in the doorway beside Rose. "Come all the way from Texas with his brothers to buy the old Murphy Ranch. They say he has more money than sense, paying what he did for that dried-up land." Rose watched as the 3 men dismounted outside the land office. Blake Garrison removed his hat, revealing dark hair that gleamed in the afternoon sun. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and weathered features that spoke of years working under the open sky. His brothers, both younger and leaner, followed him inside, their spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk. "Why would anyone from Texas come here?" Rose asked quietly, more to herself than to Mrs. Patterson. "Running from something, most likely," the woman replied with the certainty of someone who believed she understood all human motivation. "Men like that always are." Rose made her meager purchases and hurried home, eager to escape the afternoon heat and the relentless observation of her neighbors. Her small house sat on the eastern edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland and distant hills. The roof sagged on one side and the front steps were rotting, but it was hers, at least until the bank decided otherwise. She had fallen behind on payments, and the banker, Mr. Hewitt, had made it clear that his patience was not infinite. She spent the evening as she spent most evenings, sitting by lamplight and repairing torn clothing for the wives of successful men. Her fingers moved mechanically, pushing the needle through fabric while her mind wandered to memories of better times. Samuel had been kind, if not particularly ambitious. They had married when she was 19, full of hopes that had slowly withered like plants without water. His death had been shocking, but the grinding poverty that followed had been worse. A slow erosion of dignity that left her raw and exposed. The next morning, Rose woke before dawn and walked to the creek that ran behind the Henderson property. Mrs. Henderson paid her 20 cents a week to wash her family's clothes, and Rose could not afford to lose the work. The water was cold, and her hands quickly grew numb as she scrubbed and rinsed, but she worked steadily until the sun climbed high enough to warm her shoulders. "You are Rose Colter, aren't you?" The voice startled her so badly that she dropped the shirt she had been wringing out. She spun around to find Blake Garrison standing a few yards away, his horse's reins loose in his hand. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had seemed from a distance. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that marked him as a man who did his own work. His eyes were a surprising shade of gray, like storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "I am," she said, her voice coming out more defensively than she intended. "Is there something you need?" "I heard in town that you take in sewing and mending," he said. His accent carried the soft drawl of East Texas, each word deliberate and unhurried. "My brothers and we have been on the trail for 3 months. Our clothes are in a sorry state." Rose straightened, pushing a strand of dark hair away from her face with the back of her wet hand. "I can do mending. It is 10 cents a garment, depending on the work needed." "That seems fair," Blake said. He continued to look at her, and Rose felt uncomfortably aware of her patched dress and worn boots. "Would you be willing to come out to the ranch? We have a wagon full of things that need attention." The request was unusual but not unheard of. Rose hesitated, weighing the potential earnings against the impropriety of going alone to a ranch full of unmarried men. But poverty had a way of making propriety seem like a luxury she could not afford. "I could come tomorrow morning," she said finally. "I need to finish Mrs. Henderson's washing first." "Tomorrow suits me fine," Blake said. He mounted his horse with fluid grace, settling into the saddle as naturally as most men sat in chairs. "I will send one of my brothers to fetch you at 8. The ranch is about 5 miles out." He rode away before Rose could respond, leaving her staring after him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Men in Yuba City did not usually seek her out for work. They sent their wives or daughters, maintaining a careful distance from the widow who carried bad luck like a disease. True to his word, one of Blake's brothers arrived the next morning driving a sturdy wagon. He introduced himself as Ben Garrison, and he had an easy smile that reminded Rose of her late husband. He was younger than Blake, perhaps 24, with lighter hair and a more talkative nature. "Blake is particular about his clothes," Ben said as they rattled down the rutted road toward the Murphy Ranch. "Which is funny, considering we spent the last 3 months sleeping on the ground and eating beans out of a can." "Why did you come to California?" Rose asked, grateful for conversation that did not revolve around pity or gossip. "Fresh start," Ben said simply. "Texas got complicated after the war. Our father died 2 years ago and Blake sold everything to bring us out here. He has big plans for the ranch." The Murphy place came into view as they crested a low hill. It was bigger than Rose had expected, with a large barn and a sprawling ranch house that had seen better days. The previous owner had died without heirs, and the property had sat empty for nearly a year. Blake stood in the yard directing 2 hired men who were repairing a section of fence. He waved when he saw the wagon, and Rose felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "Miss Colter," Blake said, coming over to help her down from the wagon. His hand was warm and steady as she placed hers in it. "Thank you for coming out. I know it is a long trip." "It is not far," Rose said, though in truth, her feet were already sore from the walk to town that morning. Blake led her into the house, which smelled of fresh lumber and dust. The interior was sparse, furnished with only the essentials, but the bones of the building were solid. He showed her to a room where a mountain of clothes waited on a large table. "This is everything," he said, sounding almost apologetic. Shirts, trousers, even some coats that need buttons replaced. Take whatever time you need. If you want to work here, that is fine, or you can take it home. Whatever suits you. Rose surveyed the pile with a professional eye. There was easily 2 weeks of work here, maybe more. This will cost you, she said honestly. If I charge my usual rate, it could be $15 or more. That is fine, Blake said without hesitation. Would you like half now? Rose blinked in surprise. Most people made her wait until the work was finished, and even then, payment could be slow in coming. That would be helpful, she admitted. Blake pulled a leather wallet from his pocket and counted out $7 in crisp bills. Rose took the money with hands that trembled slightly. It was more cash than she had held in months. There is coffee in the kitchen if you want some, Blake said. And help yourself to anything you need. I will be outside working if you have questions. He left her alone, and Rose settled into a chair by the window where the light was good. She sorted through the clothes, making mental notes of what needed to be done. Most of it was straightforward work, tears and missing buttons, but some of the shirts needed more extensive repairs. As she began stitching, her tension slowly eased. This was something she understood, something she was good at. Around noon, Ben brought her a plate of bread and cheese and a cup of coffee. Blake says you should eat something, he said cheerfully. He worries about people. He does not even know me, Rose said, but she accepted the food gratefully. That has never stopped him from worrying, Ben said. He is like that, collects strays and broken things and tries to fix them. Rose was not sure whether to be offended or amused by the characterization. She ate her simple lunch and returned to work, her needle flashing in and out of the fabric in a steady rhythm. The afternoon passed quickly, and she was surprised when Blake appeared in the doorway to tell her that Ben would drive her home. I made good progress, Rose said, gesturing to the neat stack of completed repairs. I can come back the day after tomorrow if that works for you. Whenever you can manage it, Blake said. There is no rush. On the ride back to town, Ben chattered about their plans for the ranch, about the cattle they would buy and the improvements they would make. Rose listened with half her attention, the rest of her mind occupied with the strange puzzle of Blake Garrison. He was not like the men she had known in Yuba City, who measured their words carefully and kept their distance from a woman marked by tragedy. Over the next 2 weeks, Rose fell into a pattern. 3 times a week, Ben would fetch her in the wagon, and she would spend the day at the ranch, working her way through the mountain of mending. Blake was always courteous but distant, usually occupied with the endless tasks of getting the ranch operational. Sometimes she would look up from her work to find him watching her through the window, but he would always turn away when their eyes met. The women of Yuba City noticed her frequent trips to the Garrison Ranch, of course. Nothing escaped their attention. I cannot imagine what she does out there all day, Mrs. Henderson said loudly in the general store while Rose was selecting thread. 3 unmarried men and a widow with a questionable reputation. It does not look proper. Rose felt her face flame, but she kept her eyes on the spools of thread, refusing to give the gossips the satisfaction of a reaction. Maybe she is doing exactly what she says, mending their clothes, the shopkeeper said mildly. He was one of the few people in town who treated Rose with consistent kindness. Or maybe she is looking for a new husband, another woman chimed in. Though I cannot imagine why any man would choose damaged goods when there are perfectly good young women available. The words struck Rose like physical blows. She paid for her thread with shaking hands and fled the store, her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed in public. She made it halfway home before she had to stop, pressing her back against the wall of the livery stable and fighting to control her breathing. Those women are vipers. Rose's head snapped up to find Blake standing a few feet away, his expression dark with anger. He must have been in the stable when she arrived. I am used to it, Rose said, though her voice wavered. You should not have to be used to it, Blake said. He took a step closer and Rose could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. You have done nothing to deserve their cruelty. My husband died, Rose said flatly. And I have the audacity to still be alive and poor. In this town, that is crime enough. Blake looked at her for a long moment, and Rose had the unsettling feeling that he saw past all her careful defenses to the pain she kept hidden. When I was 19, I watched my mother die of cholera, he said quietly. Took her 3 days, and there was nothing any of us could do but watch her suffer. After she passed, people in our town looked at my father and me and my brothers like we were contagious, like grief was something they might catch if they got too close. I know what it is like to be treated as less than human because of loss. Rose's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I am sorry, she whispered. Life is hard enough without people making it harder, Blake said. He hesitated, then added, if those women bother you again, you tell me. I will have words with them. You cannot fight my battles for me, Rose said, but part of her was warmed by the offer. Maybe not, Blake agreed, but I can stand beside you while you fight them yourself. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forming like a bridge across water. Rose felt it as clearly as she felt the afternoon sun on her face, and it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The following week, Rose arrived at the ranch to find Blake in an unusually agitated state. He paced the length of the porch while she set up her work, his boots making hollow sounds on the wooden boards. Is something wrong? Rose finally asked, unable to ignore his obvious distress. Blake stopped pacing and looked at her. The bank in town, Hewitt's Bank, he is calling in a loan the previous owner took out on this property. I knew about the loan when I bought the place, but he assured me I would have 6 months to pay it off. Now he is saying he needs the money in 30 days or he will foreclose. Rose's stomach dropped. She knew Mr. Hewitt's methods all too well. He has done this before, she said quietly. He waits until someone is established and has invested money in improvements, then he forecloses and sells the property for more than it is worth. I have the money, Blake said, running a hand through his dark hair. That is not the problem, but I was counting on using that cash to buy cattle. If I pay off the loan, I will not have enough left to stock the ranch properly. Can you get another loan somewhere else? Rose asked. Not without collateral, and I have already put everything into this place, Blake said. He sat down heavily on the porch steps, his frustration evident in every line of his body. I am sorry. This is not your problem. I should not burden you with it. Rose set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the steps, maintaining a careful distance. I wish I could help, but I have nothing to offer except sympathy. That is more than most people would offer, Blake said. He turned to look at her, and Rose was struck again by the intensity of his gray eyes. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you stay in Yuba City? You are young, talented with that needle. You could go somewhere new, somewhere people do not know your history. Rose considered the question seriously. Where would I go? I have no family, no money for train fare, and at least here I know what to expect. The devil you know, as they say. You deserve better than this, Blake said fiercely. Better than people who make you feel small. Better than scraping by on washing and mending. We do not always get what we deserve, Rose said. If we did, good people would not die young and cruel people would not prosper. They sat in silence for a moment, watching as clouds built on the western horizon, promising rain that the parched land desperately needed. If I asked you to trust me, would you? Blake said suddenly. Rose turned to him in surprise. Trust you to do what? I have an idea, Blake said, his expression thoughtful. But I need to work out the details first. Can you come back tomorrow? I suppose so, Rose said slowly. But Blake, you are making me nervous. Do not be nervous, he said, and for the first time that day he smiled. I think I might have a solution that helps both of us. That night, Rose lay awake in her small house, listening to the rain that had finally arrived drum against the roof. Water dripped through the leak in the corner, and she had placed a bucket to catch it, the steady plink 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 marking time in the darkness. She thought about Blake's words, about trust and solutions, and wondered what he could possibly be planning. When Ben arrived the next morning, he seemed to be bursting with suppressed excitement. Blake has been up since before dawn, he said as they drove toward the ranch, pacing and muttering to himself. I have not seen him this wound up since he decided to leave Texas. Do you know what this is about? Rose asked. He has not said a word to me, Ben replied, but I know my brother. When he gets an idea in his head, there is no stopping him. They arrived to find Blake standing in the yard, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He helped Rose down from the wagon with careful courtesy, and she could feel the tension radiating from him. Would you take a walk with me? He asked. There is something I need to discuss with you. Rose's heart began to pound, though she could not have said why. She nodded and followed him away from the house, toward a small grove of oak trees that provided shade from the morning sun. Blake walked with his hands clasped behind his back, clearly gathering his thoughts. I am not good with pretty words, he said finally. So I am just going to say this straight. I need a wife. Rose stopped walking, certain she had misheard him. What? Blake turned to face her, his expression serious. Mr. Hewitt came by yesterday afternoon after you left. He made it clear that his willingness to foreclose has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the fact that I am an outsider. He does not like that I bought the Murphy place, and he especially does not like that I have plans to make it successful. But he mentioned that if I were a settled, married man with ties to the community, he might be more inclined to extend the loan terms. So you need to get married, Rose said slowly, trying to understand. And you are telling me this because I am asking you to marry me, Blake said. The words came out in a rush, as if he was afraid he would lose his nerve if he did not speak quickly. I know it sounds crazy, we barely know each other. But think about it, Rose. You need security and a home. I need a wife to satisfy the bank and the town gossips. We could help each other. Rose stared at him, her mind reeling. You want to marry me out of convenience, like a business arrangement. I am not explaining this well, Blake said, frustration creeping into his voice. It would not be just convenience. I like you, Rose. I like the way you work, steady and focused. I like that you do not complain, even when I know things are hard for you. I like the way you stood up to those women in the store, even though I could see it hurt you. You are stronger than you know. You pity me, Rose said, her voice flat, just like everyone else. No, Blake said sharply. I admire you. There is a difference. Pity is what those town women feel, looking down from their comfortable lives. What I feel is respect for someone who has survived and kept her dignity. Rose wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm morning. I cannot marry someone who does not love me, she whispered. I did that once and it was lonely. I will not do it again. Samuel did not love you, Blake asked gently. He was fond of me, Rose said. We were companions, but love, no. I think we both knew we married because it was expected, because I was getting old for a single woman and he needed help running his house. We were comfortable together, but there was no passion, no real partnership. When he died, I grieved for what might have been more than what we actually had. Blake moved closer, close enough that Rose could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I cannot promise you love," he said honestly. "Not yet. I do not know you well enough for that. But I can promise you respect and partnership and the chance to build something together. Maybe love comes later. Maybe it does not. But either way, you would have security and I would have a wife who understands hard work." "This is insane," Rose said, but even as she spoke, she was considering it. What did she have to lose? Her house was nearly lost anyway, and her prospects in Yuba City were non-existent. If she married Blake, she would have a home, meaningful work, and a chance to prove to all those pitying women that she was worth more than they believed. "Probably," Blake agreed. "But sometimes the crazy choice is the right one. Think about it, Rose. You would not have to take in washing anymore. You would not have to endure the gossip and the pitying looks. You would be a rancher's wife with a position in the community." "People would say I trapped you," Rose said. "They would say I used your desperation to secure a husband." "Let them say what they want," Blake said. "Their opinions do not pay the bills or keep the rain off your head." Rose looked past him to the ranch house, imagining what it could be like to live there. To have a real home again, to be part of something larger than her own small, constrained existence. It was tempting, more tempting than it should be. "If I said yes," she said carefully, "what would you expect from me? As your wife?" Blake's face colored slightly, and Rose realized he understood the delicate nature of what she was asking. "I would expect you to run the household, help with the ranch as you were able, and present a united front to the town. As for the other aspects of marriage, that would be up to you. I would not force myself on you. If affection develops between us, then we could revisit that conversation. If not, we could maintain separate rooms." It was a generous offer, more generous than Rose had any right to expect. She thought of her cold, leaking house, of her empty pantry and her worn-out shoes. She thought of the years stretching ahead of her, alone and pitied, growing old in poverty while the town watched with satisfied superiority. "I need a day to think about it," Rose said finally. "Of course," Blake said. "Take all the time you need. But Rose, whatever you decide, you can still come here to work. This does not change my respect for you." Ben drove Rose back to town in silence, clearly sensing that something significant had happened. Rose spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically doing her chores while her mind spun with possibilities and fears. That evening, she sat at her small table and made a list, writing out the advantages and disadvantages of Blake's proposal. The advantages were obvious. Security, a home, escape from poverty and gossip, the chance to be part of building something meaningful. Blake himself, who was kind and honest and treated her like an equal. The disadvantages were harder to quantify. The risk of being hurt again. The possibility that she would fall in love with a man who saw her only as a convenience. The judgment of the town, which would be harsh regardless of what she did. In the end, it came down to a simple question. Did she have the courage to take a chance on something uncertain, or would she stay safe in her misery? Rose made her decision before dawn. When Ben arrived at 8 o'clock to take her to the ranch, she was ready, wearing her best dress and with her few possessions packed in a cloth bag. "I need to see Blake," she told Ben as she climbed into the wagon. "He is at the house," Ben said, his eyes bright with curiosity. "What is going on, Miss Rose?" "You will find out soon enough," Rose said. Blake was waiting on the porch when they arrived, and he stood as Rose approached. She could see the hope and fear warring in his expression, and it made him seem suddenly younger, more vulnerable. "I will marry you," Rose said without preamble, "but I have conditions." Relief flooded Blake's face, but he nodded seriously. "Name them." "I want a real partnership," Rose said. "Not just in name. I want you to consult me on decisions that affect the ranch. I want my opinions valued." And I want honesty between us always. If you develop feelings for someone else, if this arrangement stops working for you, I want to know immediately." "Agreed," Blake said. "And I have a condition of my own. I want you to tell me when you are unhappy or uncomfortable with something. I cannot read your mind, and I do not want you suffering in silence." "Agreed," Rose said. She held out her hand and Blake shook it, his grip warm and firm. "Should we ride into town and find the minister?" Blake asked. "I suppose we should," Rose said, "before I lose my nerve." Ben whooped with delight when they told him, and he insisted on coming along as a witness. The three of them rode into Yuba City in the wagon, and Rose watched the familiar buildings pass by with a strange sense of unreality. By the end of the day, her entire life would be different. The minister, Reverend Thomas, was surprised by their request but willing to perform the ceremony. Within an hour, Rose found herself standing in the small church, wearing her best dress and holding a hastily assembled bouquet of wildflowers that Ben had picked from the roadside. Blake stood beside her in his clean shirt and dark trousers, his hair neatly combed and his expression solemn. The ceremony was brief and practical, with none of the romance Rose had once dreamed of as a young girl. But when Blake slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady and his voice was clear as he made his vows. Rose spoke her own vows in a voice that barely shook, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them married, Blake kissed her cheek with careful respect. They emerged from the church to find that word had already spread through the small town. A cluster of women stood across the street, their faces registering shock and disapproval in equal measure. Rose saw Mrs. Henderson's mouth hanging open in undisguised amazement. Blake offered Rose his arm and she took it, lifting her chin as they walked to the wagon. She could feel the weight of their stares, could imagine the conversations already beginning, but for once she did not care. Let them talk. She was Rose Garrison now, a rancher's wife, and she had nothing to be ashamed of. The ride back to the ranch seemed both too long and too short. Rose sat beside Blake on the wagon seat, hyper-aware of every place where his body touched hers, the solid warmth of his shoulder against hers when the wagon hit a rut. Ben rode his horse alongside them, still grinning like he had won a prize at the county fair. "I cannot wait to see everyone's faces when they hear about this," Ben said cheerfully. Blake Garrison, married after less than a month in California, and to the prettiest woman in Yuba City, no less. Rose felt her face heat at the compliment, but Blake just smiled. "Ben, would you mind staying in town tonight? Rose and I need time to settle into the new arrangement, and I think we would do better without an audience." Ben's grin widened, but he nodded. "I will bunk at the hotel. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Garrison." He veered off toward town, and suddenly Rose and Blake were alone. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Blake guided the horses with competent hands, his profile strong against the afternoon sky. "Are you frightened?" he asked quietly. Rose considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted, "but more nervous than frightened. This all happened so fast." "We can slow down," Blake said. "Take time to get to know each other properly. There is no rush for anything." They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills. Blake helped Rose down from the wagon and then stood there, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "I cleared out the main bedroom for you," he said. "Fresh linens and everything. I will take one of the smaller rooms down the hall." "Thank you," Rose said. She picked up her bag and followed him into the house, which felt different now that it was her home. Blake showed her to a spacious room at the end of the hall, with large windows that overlooked the eastern pastures. The bed was neatly made, and someone had placed a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Ben did that. Blake said, gesturing to the flowers. "He is a romantic at heart, though he would deny it." Rose set her bag on the floor and turned to face her new husband. "Blake, I want you to know I will work hard to make this marriage a real partnership. I will not be a burden to you." "You could never be a burden," Blake said firmly. He hesitated, then added, "I am going to go check on the horses and give you time to settle in. There is food in the kitchen if you are hungry. Make yourself at home, Rose. This is your place now." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Rose sank onto the edge of the bed. The enormity of what she had done washed over her, and for a moment she could not breathe. She had married a man she barely knew, left behind the only town she had ever lived in, and tied her fate to his in the most permanent way possible. But as her breathing steadied and she looked around the clean, comfortable room, Rose felt something she had not felt in years: hope. Maybe this was the start of something good. Maybe Blake Garrison was the answer to prayers she had been afraid to speak aloud. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe and placing her hairbrush and hand mirror on the dresser. The room slowly took on a more lived-in feel, and Rose found herself relaxing. She washed her face in the basin of water that had been left for her, then ventured out to explore the rest of the house. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a good stove and plenty of counter space. The pantry was adequately stocked, and Rose began pulling out ingredients for a simple supper. Cooking for someone other than herself felt strange but pleasant. She made biscuits and gravy, fried some bacon, and set the table for two. Blake came in just as she was dishing up the food. He had washed up outside and his hair was damp, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "This looks wonderful," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "I cannot remember the last time I had a home-cooked meal at an actual table." They sat down to eat, and the first few minutes passed in awkward silence. Then Blake began asking Rose about her life before Samuel, and she found herself telling him about her childhood, about her parents who had died of influenza when she was 16, about the series of households where she had worked as a hired girl before meeting Samuel. "I always wanted to learn to read properly," Rose admitted, "but there was never time or money for schooling. I know my letters and can read simple things, but books are mostly a mystery to me." "I could teach you," Blake offered. "I am not a scholar, but I can read well enough. We have long evenings ahead of us. We might as well use them productively." The offer touched Rose more than she wanted to admit. "I would like that," she said softly. After supper, Blake insisted on helping with the dishes, working beside her at the sink while the last light faded from the sky. They talked about the ranch, about Blake's plans to build up a cattle operation and maybe start breeding horses. Rose found herself offering suggestions, drawing on things she had learned during her brief marriage to Samuel, and Blake listened with genuine interest. "You have a good head for this," he said. "I am glad you are here, Rose. I think we are going to do well together." That night, Rose lay in her new bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. She could hear Blake moving in his room down the hall, the creak of floorboards and the soft thump of boots being removed. For the first time in years, she did not feel crushingly alone. There was someone else in the house, someone who had chosen to bind his life to hers, and the knowledge was both comforting and terrifying. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Rose threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, scrubbing floors and washing windows, mending curtains and organizing the kitchen. Ben moved back into his room in the house, and the youngest Garrison brother, Bradley, arrived from Texas with a herd of 20 cattle and 3 good horses. Bradley was 22, with an easy charm and a restless energy that reminded Rose of a caged animal. He greeted her with open curiosity, looking back and forth between her and Blake as if trying to solve a puzzle. "So you are the woman who got my brother to settle down," Bradley said, shaking Rose's hand with enthusiasm. "I have to say, I did not see that coming. Blake has been married to his work for as long as I can remember." "It was a practical decision," Rose said, feeling the need to explain. "We both had needs that the other could meet." "Whatever you say," Bradley said, but his grin suggested he did not entirely believe her. True to his word, Mr. Hewitt extended the terms of the loan when he learned that Blake had married. He came by the ranch himself to deliver the news, his expression sour as he looked at Rose standing on the porch beside her husband. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Hewitt said, his tone making it clear that congratulations were the last thing he wanted to offer. "Though I must say, Mrs. Garrison, this is quite a change in circumstances for you." "It is," Rose agreed pleasantly. "I am very fortunate, indeed," Hewitt said, his eyes narrowed as he looked at Blake. "I will expect regular payments on that loan, Garrison. Do not think that your new marital status gives you any special privileges." "I would not dream of it," Blake said, his voice cold. "Was there anything else?" Hewitt left, and Blake turned to Rose with a wry smile. "Well, that was unpleasant, but at least we bought ourselves some time." As summer deepened into fall, Rose found her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She managed the household, helped with the books, and even learned to ride well enough to accompany Blake when he checked on the cattle in the near pastures. The physical work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that washing other people's clothes had never been. The town's reaction to her marriage was predictably mixed. Some of the women who had pitied her now looked at her with barely concealed envy. Blake was considered a good catch, wealthy and hardworking and undeniably handsome. Rose could see the questions in their eyes. How had someone like her managed to secure someone like him? Others were openly hostile, convinced that Rose had somehow trapped or tricked Blake into marriage. Mrs. Henderson was particularly vocal in her disapproval, spreading rumors that Rose had been secretly meeting Blake for weeks before their sudden marriage, engaging in improper behavior that had forced his hand. Blake dealt with these rumors with swift efficiency. He made a point of accompanying Rose into town, his hand always at the small of her back, his manner making it clear that she was valued and respected. When he overheard Mrs. Henderson making a particularly nasty comment at the general store, he confronted her directly. "Mrs. Henderson, I suggest you find something more productive to do with your time than spreading lies about my wife," Blake said, his voice carrying across the store. "Rose is the best thing that has happened to me since I came to California, and I will not tolerate anyone speaking ill of her." The store went silent, and Mrs. Henderson's face turned bright red. She stammered something unintelligible and fled, and after that, the worst of the gossip died down. People might still talk in private, but they were more careful about what they said in public. Despite the external validation, Rose struggled with her own doubts. She and Blake had fallen into a comfortable partnership, working together during the day and sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. But the physical distance between them remained. They slept in separate rooms, rarely touched beyond the occasional brush of hands, and Rose found herself wondering if this was all their marriage would ever be. She was attracted to Blake, more than she wanted to admit. She noticed the way his shoulders moved under his shirt when he worked, the deep timbre of his laugh, the gentleness in his hands when he handled the horses. But she had no idea if he felt the same pull toward her, and she was too afraid of rejection to ask. One evening in late October, a storm rolled in from the coast, bringing heavy rain and howling wind. Rose made dinner while the rain pounded against the windows, and Blake and his brothers came in soaked and shivering from securing the barn and outbuildings. "It is a bad one," Ben said, toweling off his hair. "The creek is already rising. I hope the cattle have sense enough to stay away from the low ground." They ate dinner listening to the storm rage outside, and then Ben and Bradley retreated to their rooms, exhausted from the day's work. Blake stayed in the kitchen with Rose, helping her clean up. "You should get some rest too," Rose said. "You have been up since before dawn." "So have you," Blake pointed out. He dried the last plate and set it on the shelf, then turned to face her. "Rose, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Blake hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Are you happy here? I know this is not the marriage you probably dreamed of as a girl. If you are unhappy, I need to know." Rose's heart began to race. "I am not unhappy," she said carefully. "I am grateful for everything you have given me. A home, security, respect. That is more than I had any right to expect." "But," Blake prompted, clearly hearing the unspoken word. Rose took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "But sometimes I wonder if this is all it will ever be. A business arrangement. Two people sharing a house but not a life." Blake moved closer, and Rose could see the intensity in his gray eyes. "Is that what you want? More than an arrangement?" "I do not know," Rose admitted. "I am afraid to want more. Afraid that I will care too much and you will not care enough and I will end up hurt again." "Rose," Blake said softly. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I know I said I could not promise you love when I proposed, but I think I need to amend that statement." Rose's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement for me," Blake said. "I look forward to seeing you in the morning. I think about you during the day when I am working. I go to sleep wondering if you are comfortable, if you have everything you need. And when I see other men looking at you in town, I want to remind them that you are mine." "Blake," Rose whispered, afraid to hope. "I am falling in love with you," Blake said. "Maybe I have been from the start, and I was just too stubborn or stupid to recognize it. But I cannot keep pretending that I see you as just a business partner when my heart races every time you smile at me." Tears stung Rose's eyes, and she realized they were happy tears, the first she had cried in years. "I am falling in love with you too," she confessed. "I was so afraid you would never see me as anything more than the pitiful widow you rescued." "I never saw you as pitiful," Blake said fiercely. He raised his free hand to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle. "I saw you as strong and resilient and beautiful. I still do." He leaned down slowly, giving Rose plenty of time to pull away, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was like coming home to a place she had never been but had always longed for. The kiss was tender at first, exploratory, and then it deepened as years of loneliness and longing poured out of both of them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to rush you," he said. "We can take this as slow as you need." Rose surprised herself by laughing, the sound bright and joyful. "Blake, we got married after knowing each other for 3 weeks. I think we are past worrying about rushing things." Blake grinned, and Rose felt her heart expand with affection for this man who had chosen her, who saw her worth when the rest of the world had written her off. That night, Rose did not sleep in her room at the end of the hall. She followed Blake to his smaller room, and they lay together in his narrow bed, wrapped in each other's arms while the storm raged outside. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears, building the foundation of real intimacy. When they finally made love, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Rose's eyes. Blake was patient and attentive, making sure she felt cherished and desired. And afterward, as she lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Rose felt a peace she had not known was possible. The next morning, Rose woke to find Blake already up and dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed and watching her with an expression of such open affection that it made her breath catch. "Good morning, wife," he said, leaning down to kiss her. "Good morning, husband," Rose replied, the words tasting new and sweet on her tongue. They moved Rose's belongings into Blake's room that day, and if Ben and Bradley noticed the change, they were tactful enough not to comment. But Rose caught Ben grinning at Blake over breakfast, and Blake just smiled back, unashamed. The transformation in their marriage was profound. Now, when they worked together, they moved in unconscious harmony, anticipating each other's needs and thoughts. Blake began seeking Rose's opinion on everything from which cattle to buy to how to handle difficult neighbors. Rose bloomed under his respect and affection, growing more confident in her role as his partner. In town, people began to notice the change. Blake and Rose were clearly in love, their connection obvious in every glance and touch. The women who had pitied Rose now watched her with undisguised envy as Blake helped her from the wagon with careful tenderness, his eyes never leaving her face. "I heard Mrs. Henderson saying you must have put a spell on him," Ben reported one day, clearly amused, "that there is no other explanation for how devoted he is." "The only spell she has cast is being herself," Blake said, pulling Rose close and kissing the top of her head. "That is more than enough." As fall turned to winter, the ranch prospered. The cattle thrived, and Blake bought more land from a neighboring property owner who was retiring. He consulted Rose on every decision, and her practical insights proved invaluable. Together, they built something real and lasting. In December, Rose realized that her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, afraid to hope, and then went to see the doctor in town. He confirmed what she had suspected. She was pregnant, about 6 weeks along if his calculations were correct. Rose drove the wagon home in a daze, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. She had thought she might never have children, that her brief marriage to Samuel, which had produced no offspring, meant she was barren. But now life was growing inside her, a tangible symbol of the love she shared with Blake. She found Blake in the barn, repairing a section of damaged stall. He looked up when she entered, and his smile faded when he saw her expression. "Rose, what is wrong? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Rose said, and then she started to cry, overwhelmed by emotion. "Blake, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Blake just stared at her, and Rose's heart clenched with sudden fear. What if he was not ready for this? What if he did not want children? Then Blake let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses. He crossed the barn in 3 long strides and swept Rose into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "A baby," Blake said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "Rose, you have made me the happiest man in California, in the whole world. You are not worried?" Rose asked. "It is so soon. We have only been married a few months. I am not worried," Blake said firmly. "I am thrilled, scared maybe, but thrilled. We are going to be parents, Rose. We are going to have a family." They told Ben and Bradley that evening over dinner, and both men reacted with enthusiasm. Ben immediately began planning additions to the house to make room for a nursery, and Bradley declared that he was going to be the favorite uncle. As Rose's pregnancy progressed, Blake became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, do less heavy work, eat more at every meal. Rose tolerated his hovering with amused patience, understanding that it came from love rather than any belief that she was fragile. In late February, Rose woke in the middle of the night to find her nightgown soaked. Her water had broken, and the pains were already starting. Blake woke instantly when she touched his shoulder, and he moved with calm efficiency, sending Ben to fetch the doctor and getting Rose settled while Bradley heated water and gathered clean linens. The labor was long and difficult. Rose had never been so exhausted, so overwhelmed by pain and fear. But Blake stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, his steady presence anchoring her when she thought she could not go on. Finally, as the sun was rising on a clear March morning in 1884, their son was born. The doctor placed the squalling infant on Rose's chest, and she looked down at his red, wrinkled face with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Rose, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel Blake Garrison, honoring both Rose's first husband and his father. Blake held his son with trembling hands, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears as he studied the tiny face. "Thank you," he whispered to Rose. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." Recovery was slow, but Rose did not mind. She spent her days in the rocking chair Blake had made for her, nursing Samuel and watching the ranch come to life with spring. Blake was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor when Samuel was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with unabashed wonder. When Rose was finally strong enough to make the trip, they took Samuel to church in Yuba City to have him christened. The women of the town gathered around to admire the baby, and Rose saw the envy in their eyes, though now it was mixed with grudging respect. She had not just married well. She had built a real marriage, a partnership that anyone could see was based on genuine love and respect. Mrs. Henderson approached as they were leaving, her expression stiff. "Your son is beautiful, Mrs. Garrison," she said formally. "Thank you," Rose replied graciously. There was no point in holding grudges. She had one in every way that mattered. As they drove home, Blake reached over and took Rose's hand. "Do you remember the day I asked you to marry me? When you said you could not marry someone who did not love you?" "I remember," Rose said. "I am glad you took the chance anyway," Blake said. "I am glad you trusted me, even when I could not promise you everything you wanted." "You have given me more than I ever dreamed of," Rose said honestly. "A home, a family, love. You have given me a life worth living, Blake. How could I not be grateful?" "We gave each other those things," Blake corrected gently. "You saved me as much as I saved you, Rose. Maybe more." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, difficult calvings and prices that fluctuated wildly. Rose had two more children, a daughter named Emma in 1886 and another son, Robert, in 1888. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in Sutter County. Through it all, Rose and Blake's love deepened and matured. They learned each other's rhythms, developed their own traditions and private jokes. Blake taught Rose to read fluently, and she devoured every book she could get her hands on. Rose taught Blake to see the beauty in small moments, to slow down and appreciate what they had built together. Ben married a schoolteacher from Sacramento in 1885, and they built a house on the eastern section of the ranch. Bradley eventually settled down too, though it took him longer, marrying a widow with two children of her own. The Garrison Ranch became a true family operation, with all of them working together toward common goals. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Blake took Rose on a picnic to the oak grove where he had proposed. The children were with Ben and his wife for the afternoon, and it was just the two of them, alone under the spreading branches. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Blake asked, pouring them each a glass of wine. "About wanting a real partnership." "I remember," Rose said. She was 33 now, and the years had been kind to her. There was silver in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but she had never felt more beautiful, more fully herself. "I think we achieved that," Blake said, "but it has become so much more than a partnership. You are my best friend, Rose, my confidante, the love of my life. I cannot imagine walking this path with anyone else." Rose leaned over and kissed him, tasting wine and sweetness and the years of love they had shared. "When I married you, I thought I was making a practical choice," she said. "A way to survive. I had no idea I was choosing the greatest adventure of my life." "Are you happy?" Blake asked, echoing the question he had asked her that night during the storm all those years ago. "I am more than happy," Rose said. "I am fulfilled. I am loved. I am home." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Rose thought about the woman she had been when she first met Blake, beaten down by loss and poverty and the casual cruelty of people who should have known better. That woman would not have recognized the person she had become, confident, loved, secure in her place in the world. Blake took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band that had rested on her finger for 10 years. "I love you, Rose Garrison," he said. "More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Rose replied. "Thank you for choosing me when everyone else had decided I was not worth choosing." "You were always worth choosing," Blake said firmly. "The world just needed to catch up to what I saw from the beginning." As they packed up the picnic and headed home to their children and their life, Rose reflected on the strange turns that had brought her here. She had been the woman everyone pitied, the tragic widow whose best days were behind her. Now she was the wife everyone envied, though not for the reasons they might have assumed. It was not Blake's wealth or status that made her the object of envy, though those things certainly did not hurt. It was the obvious love between them, the partnership they had built, the family they had created together. The women of Yuba City watched Rose walk through town with her head high, her husband's hand warm in hers, and they understood that she had won something they could only dream of. She had not just survived her tragedies, she had transcended them. She had taken a practical arrangement and transformed it into a love story for the ages. The ranch continued to thrive as the new century approached. Samuel grew into a serious, studious boy who loved working with the cattle. Emma was wild and fearless, riding her pony before she could properly walk. Robert was the baby, sweet-tempered and affectionate, his father's favorite, though Blake would never admit to having favorites. Blake and Rose grew old together, their love a constant in a changing world. They saw the introduction of barbed wire and windmills, watched as the Wild West they had known slowly gave way to civilization. Through it all, they remained each other's anchor, the center around which their family revolved. When Rose was 60, Blake 72, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel had married and given them 3 grandchildren, Emma had 2, and Robert's wife was expecting their first. The ranch had passed into the next generation's capable hands, and Blake and Rose had settled into a comfortable semi-retirement. "We built something good, did we not?" Blake said, his hand finding Rose's as naturally as breathing. "We built something extraordinary," Rose corrected. "A family. A legacy. A love that will outlast us both." Blake smiled, the same smile that had made Rose's heart flutter all those years ago. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every moment, every choice, all of it just to end up here with you. Even the parts where I was stubborn and difficult." Rose teased. "Especially those parts," Blake said. They kept life interesting. They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the hills gold, and Rose felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had lived. She had started with nothing, had been beaten down and written off, but she had refused to stay down. She had taken a chance on a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart, and he had given her the world. Blake Garrison died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, with Rose holding his hand. She grieved deeply but without bitterness, grateful for the 50 years they had shared. She followed him 3 years later, her children and grandchildren surrounding her bed, and her last words were his name, spoken with love and longing. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree that had witnessed their first kiss. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their lives, but also an inscription that Samuel had chosen. Here lie Blake and Rose Garrison. In life they chose each other. In death they are not divided. The Garrison Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose partnership over pride, love over fear. And in Yuba City, the story of Rose and Blake became legend, the tale of the woman everyone pitied who became the wife everyone envied, all because a cowboy from Texas saw her worth when no one else did, and she had the courage to trust in his vision of what they could become together. Their love story became a reminder that sometimes the most practical decisions lead to the most profound romance, and that choosing to love someone is the first step in a journey that can transform not just individual lives, but entire legacies.